Welcome to the Soulful Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Analisa Leaming, Broadway actor turned coach for big dreamers. This is a show about choosing to live inside out, becoming sourced from within, and then acting upon your deepest longings. From starting your dream business to starring on Broadway, from sacred activism to being a radiant, aligned parent and everything in between, we will walk the razor's edge of these two seemingly contradictory words, soulful ambition. This podcast is here to awaken the longing in your chest that is so big it threatens to swallow you whole. Because the manifestation of your true desires is your destined path and the medicine and the magic that the world needs. This is Soulful Ambition. Hello, welcome back to Soulful Ambition. Before we get into today's episode, I want to share a couple things. So you've maybe noticed that there have been a few gaps in the episodes, and I'm trying out a new format for the summertime because I want to be with my kiddos. I want to be more present. Yeah, it just feels like the season. So permission for you to do the same in whatever way it might be calling you as well. Maybe now's not the time to be multitasking and doing many, many projects, or maybe it is. What is your truth? It's just not mine right now. And that's unusual. My identity is like, what? Who are you? You love having many irons in the fire and creating a little of this and doing a little of that. Our au pair, we had an au pair living with us from South Africa for the first year of River's life. He's my second son. And she left to go be with a new family, and we decided to try it out here on our own. She left about a month ago when this is dropping. And so you can kind of see how I'm doing. No, I've gone quiet. I've gone quiet on Instagram. I'll share more when I'm on the other side of what I'm going through right now, but life is very full and we are entering a new chapter. And in sitting with myself and going within, my mind, my logical brain is like, no, Analisa, you can't do this. Like, you have a business to run and consistency is so important and every episode and showing up. And I just am going to be like, no, I'm going to do this in a different way. I'm going to do this in the way that's like truest to me right now. So I'm sharing that for any of you that are looking for that same permission or nudge to listen to that still small voice inside of you, maybe before it gets to be rip-roaring in your ear and maybe shows up as dis-ease in your body or in your relationships. Or maybe that's where it is too, and that's perfect because sometimes we have to blow shit up. So honoring wherever you are. I want to tell you that if you are looking for some kind of support, or you're like, okay, we're halfway through the year, I had these dreams and goals, or something shifting within me, and I just want support. I don't want to hold this all by myself. Come join me. The next round of Soulful Ambition Circle, which is a 6-month group program. We meet twice a month. It's so juicy, y'all. And we start in July. 2 Mondays a month. You also have access to my soulful study halls that I hold weekly. If that feels good to drop into, I send out a monthly guided practice. And then you'll also be in this container of beautiful souls where we are speaking the same language, learning to speak similar language. If you are feeling growth, if you are feeling expansion and you're hitting a limiting belief and you're like, I want other eyes on this, or I love the idea of coming twice a month and being guided through practices to listen to my inner voice. It's not lectures where Analisa has all the answers. It's like workshops where we'll move our bodies a little bit. If that scares you, I promise it will be gentle. I won't bite. It won't be too much. We'll go at your pace. We'll dance with your main character energy. We'll expand on that. We will go into what is holding you back. We'll do shadow practices to de-rubble, get out of our own way. And like, yes, you are the way, but there are aspects of your little self. And I don't mean like 5-year-old self. I mean little like egoical self, as my teacher calls it, like the part of you that gets grippy or the part of you that wants all the attention, but that's not really true you. There are all these aspects of our shadow that come to play, and we will dance with them and love them and let them be seen by others, which is medicine in and of itself. All of this in service of your soul's expansion and what you were here to do on this earth, so you can write the book or start the podcast or get on the stage. Y'all, the successes that I am seeing both in my one-on-ones events and my program, like people are actually booking the gigs that they are dreaming of. They're getting the representation they're dreaming of. They're meeting people in their lives. The way that they're relating to their spouse and their children is changing. Like lives are being changed and it's powerful. So if any of this is speaking to you or resonating in your soul, go to my website, AnalisaLemming.com, click the link below wherever you're listening to this or watching this and just apply, answer a few questions to see if we're a fit. And I would love to dance with you for the next 6 months, for the rest of 2024. Like, let's dance together. Let's co-create. Let's step into the highest version of you. If this is singing for you, then it's for you. All right. This episode, my friends, is so powerful. And it's one of my dearest, oldest friends. You will hear it all. We have an old episode together from earlier on in the podcast. If that interests you, I will link to that so you can take a listen. Sit back and enjoy my dear friend, author, Broadway actor, Maria Failla. Hello, welcome back to Soulful Ambition. I am your host, Analisa Lemming. Having traded the glamour of Broadway for my own soul's calling, join me in exploring this transformative journey within. This is not just a podcast, it is a sanctuary where we will nourish our spirit, find unwavering support, draw inspiration, activate our potential, and take meaningful action upon our deepest longings. This is Soulful Ambition. And today we have a very, very special guest, a repeat guest, and my dear friend, Maria Failla. Maria is a plant killer turned plant lady on a mission to help everyone successfully care for plants and make the world a kinder and greener place. After learning to care for plants successfully and experiencing the exponential joy caring for plants brought to her life, she founded the Growing Joy with Plants podcast to learn alongside her listeners as she interviews experts in all aspects of plant care. Growing Joy with Plants has grown into the top home and garden, houseplant, and gardening podcast in the world, closing in on 3 million downloads, and was a 2020 Webby honoree. In 2022, she authored Growing Joy, the Plant Lover's Guide to Cultivating Happiness and Plants. And Maria spent the last decade as a professional musical theater performer and has been seen in Broadway musicals, On the Great White Way, and around the world. She's thrilled to now use her voice to help people grow more joy in their lives through plant care. So, my dear friend, Maria and I met in, I think it's 2012, but we can fact check that.
Yeah, so long ago. Yeah.
Singing in Germany for a few weeks at the Kurt Weill Festival. And so, my question for you, my friend, is Maria, if one morning we were sitting at that delicious breakfast buffet in our hotel in Germany.
Oh, yeah. Those croissants.
So good. If I could say, hey, girl, 11 years from now, this is going to be your bio and introduction on a podcast. Like, what would you have? What do you think she would have thought?
I mean, even in listening to you read that bio, it's still, I still don't believe it. Like hearing the word author to my name, even seeing my book in random bookstores, it's so far. The life that I'm living right now is such a far departure from the life that I think I had probably shared that the dreams that I had 11 years ago that I had shared with you. And it's so wild. I mean, never in my wildest dreams. I mean, both of us having kind of pivoted in our careers and sitting here talking about this, especially coming off of being on a balancing act, before the rebrand, talking about the biz and now not thinking about the biz at all is the most wild experience. I thought I would die on Broadway. I thought I would die in a dressing room at the Neil Simon Theater. Like I really had no other intentions beyond that. And now for the Broadway thing to just be like a little blip in the longer bio is pretty wild to me. What about you? I would assume you probably feel the same way, right?
Okay, so I have been saying for a long time, yes, that I couldn't have imagined living in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, like with two boys. Like, but you know what? That's not true. I think more recent Analisa couldn't have imagined that. Like Analisa on Broadway 6 years ago couldn't have imagined that. But I've been remembering that
early, like I would say 22, 23 years old, like fresh to New York, I used to say, I'm going to get married at 30 and I'm going to have my first child at 35. And so probably around 35, I'm going to not want to be on stage as much. And I'm going to look for a job teaching at a college somewhere else in the country.
Yeah.
And I remembered this thing that I've kind of spoken. I was like, wow, a lot of that is really true. But there was definitely what I didn't anticipate was like in my mind, that was such a seamless transition. And while aspects of it was there definitely has been a lot of identity shedding. And so I'm curious for you and in the last few years, I just think, it's just the most massive part of our identity is as a performer. And so what has that been like and felt like for you?
It's such a good question. It really does feel like some form of an ego death that I've gone through in the last, I think specifically 3 years, particularly in 2021. I remember, well, first off, I just want to say and honor, Analisa, I'm pretty sure you were the first person, one of the first 3 people I voice memoed about the idea to launch my podcast. I think I was on the subway and I was like, but what if I made a podcast about houseplants? And I think I had like sent you a voice memo about it. And, you kind of encouraged me to kind of move, to chase that kind of intuitive whisper. And it's just wild. It's really wild to be sitting here with you, 7 years later, having kind of been along the ride. I think when I think back to so I never had the dream of getting married and having kids. And I actually, because all I wanted to do was die in a Broadway theater, I didn't even allow for the option to be married, to have children, even be available to me in my dream process, because I was like, well, I don't want to have kids and then be going to the show when they get home from school. So I'm not going to have kids, and I don't see a guy, I don't envision a guy who would be a partner to me in the way that I would need. And so, in 2020, well, when I had launched my podcast, it used to be called Bloom and Grow Radio. Now it's called Growing Joy with Plants. It was a true side hustle, side passion. And I remember actually very intentionally leaving it off my resume when I was auditioning. And I had a private, I had my personal actor Instagram, and then I had my podcast Instagram, because I felt like I needed to keep them separate. And God forbid, if someone in the acting world found out that I had this plant podcast, they might think, oh, Maria gave up. She's doing this other thing now. She's not taking performing as seriously. And I remember feeling like I had to kind of truncate and separate myself. When I got my book deal with one of the largest publishers in the country, I remember not telling my agent about it because I didn't want him to think I would be too busy with my book deal and not submit me for auditions. So there was a lot of ego that I feel like that I had attached to not only performing being my primary thing, my only passion, but also that I never took the podcast too seriously. It was always this kind of side thing. So all of a sudden when I got my book deal and I lost my job as a performer, I was in a show at City Center that got closed down in the pandemic. And I was, looking at this book deal and looking at this podcast that I was able to grow in the pandemic. I had to do a lot of work on stepping out of like the really intense imposter syndrome that I had with the show, because I was like, the more energy I put towards this, the less I'm going to be a performer, and I'm only a performer. So if I'm not a performer, who am I? I wish I had kind of jumped into the deep end of that earlier, because I think I had a 2-year, very long, very painful death by 1,000 cuts experience of like begrudgingly white knuckling, like letting go of this performer identity. And it was really hard. But what I realized is, my identity as a performer, which while I was in that identity, while I was performing, while I was auditioning, was 100% of my life, right? It was 100% of who I thought I was. It had to do with how I looked. It had to do with how I presented myself, with how I talked, how intense I let myself be, how ambitious I let myself be. It's what made me special. And then once I was able to separate myself from that identity as a performer, I realized that there is so much more to me than I had allowed in. And And I'm so much more interesting and fun outside of that very rigid persona that I had kind of been in, which what I thought that was my authentic self. But I had to kind of let that version of myself die a little bit in order to step into the full potential. Like I don't know. I'm curious if you feel this way. I feel like you were more embodied back then than I was, but I feel like I was playing with 40% of what I had. And as I was able to kind of step out of the industry and realize the toxic effect that it had had on me, I was able to kind of expand into, I think right now I'm at like a 70 or 80%.
That's really beautiful. I haven't thought about it exactly in that lens. But I feel, you know what, something I feel is that actually a lot of the intentionality that I brought to performing and how sacred it always was for me, like so deeply sacred, that I always had this prayer of like, let me be a vessel through which you, the divine, sing through. But I sort of feel like through the years of performing and that being my sole purpose and focus, that was the place where I like turned up my divine nature and my light. And it was almost like I only knew how to channel that when on stage or in an audition or performing. And to be able to now, like make all life, at least I don't, but it is my goal to make all of life that sacred and creative and connected. I feel like in a different way, like I have permission to do that, and that, you know, it's okay. It's okay to not just have this one focus that is that is so all consuming.
It reminds me of definitely something that I experienced, and it's something I've talked about with other friends, where, you know, when you're an actor, you have this feeling of like you're only worthy or you're only in it when you have a job. And then you're kind of failing when you're auditioning, when you're out of work, all of these kind of things. Or at least that's how I felt. I was only worthy. I was only able to feel aligned and to feel good about myself when I was booking work. But then when you booked the work, if you didn't exactly have the job that you wanted and you were the understudy, then that was a whole nother thing that you had to, you know, accomplish. But yeah, like the fact that you would let your job dictate your feelings about yourself and your feelings of worthiness, and just like you described, like your light that you could either turn up or dim, you know, is now in my experience now of my life, you know, it's sad that sometimes I get a little sad that I let myself be that restricted for so long. And yet also I have so much deep gratitude for where I was in order to kind of learn those lessons, to experience what, for me personally, a fuller life feels like, you know?
Yeah. And to be able to share this with people listening that are very much still on that path. And it's like, it doesn't mean you have to change career paths, but it's like, what is it? How do you go about this in what I keep calling the new way? Instead of that's kind of like the old way, the programmed way, the collective consciousness of musical theater way.
Did I just see that you interviewed Ellery Ward?
Yeah.
She, to me, I see performers now coming up, you know, kind of behind us, fully embodied, like in their element, using what we were told, or I don't want to say that because I'm sure that they're told this too, but I believed everything that casting directors told me, that if I was too fat, I was too fat. If I was too operatic, I was too operatic. Like I believed, I prioritized casting directors' opinions over my own. And then I see people like Ellery and people like, I don't know, all these younger performers that I follow on TikTok who are like, no, this is who I am. This is my spiritual gift. And this is how I'm going to allow my gift to come through. You can take it or leave it. I am just so inspired by them. And yeah, I think that's so magical. And I hope that, you know, through the work that you're doing and through, you know, this podcast and through leaders like Ellery, that, you know, that isn't as much of a common experience for theater moving forward.
Yeah, I do think that there will be I do think it's going to be kind of like a ground up change and shake up, and commercial musical theater will probably be like the last thing to really to shift in that way. But it is happening, and it always happens slower than we want it to. But I do believe that it is. So, okay. So because this is my podcast and I love having people on like you, dear, like beloved friends that I get to just catch up with. And share these like really conscious conversations that I hope people listening also feel like we're just all sitting in a coffee shop together. And so what I would love to like kind of catch up with you on and learn about how this particular thing has impacted your journey and where you are now is the embodiment work and the like being around other women in circle, and how that has, maybe what some of that was for you and how that has impacted just basically life for you.
Yeah. We'll start with it. We'll start with embodiment, because the embodiment leads to the second half of that. But our little monkey minds, really do such a number on us. And I think that, in my 20s, I was particularly driven by ego and by my mind. And I think my drive, I think a lot of those things got me really far, and I'm so thankful. But I think often I bypassed my body's reaction to things, my body's feelings, because I felt like this is what I need to do. And so I'm going to do it. It's so funny. We think about, when you're non-equity and you have to pound the pavement and you have to wake up at 3 a.m., you have to go stand in the snow, you have to get in there. And I'm so inspired by these people right now who are advocating for themselves to not have to do that anymore, for the non-union people to be standing outside. But I don't know, I just did it. And another issue was I felt very frozen in my body in general, because my body was really scrutinized in the performing world. You've been on this journey with me for many, many years, but I was a soprano. I had the voice of an ingenue, and I had, a size 8 body. And I was told all the time that I was too fat for the roles that I wanted to be, and that I knew that I could sing, and that I knew that I was spiritually here to embody. But then I was being told over and over again that my body wasn't right for that. And so I was in a really intense rupture with my body for what I think was, the most of my 20s. I don't think I really understood the level of trauma that I think my body kind of endured by receiving so much hatred from myself until I left the industry, and I was able to do some healing work and even understand some really disordered eating that I was doing that I didn't even process as being disordered eating. It's just what I thought I had to do. And so, healing that relationship with my body was so important and took such a long time to be able to look at myself in the mirror and not, and this is it hurts my heart to say it, but not hate myself. I had some really serious self-hatred issues. And part of the work that I've done, this embodiment work, people talk about embodiment a lot. For me, it was this practice called Ishtara, nonlinear movement that kind of heals trauma on a kind of cellular nervous system level, all about nervous system regulation. And you learn about, these patterns that your body, your nervous system gets into, and then you kind of heal it with an alchemy. That's what they call it in Ishtara. But when I was writing my book, which is a self-help book about how to use plants and nature to live a happier life, I did a lot of research on the nervous system in general and how out of regulation most of society is. I had been using nature to help regulate my nervous system already. And I had even just noticed before I had language for it that being with my houseplants helped regulate my nervous system, helped get me back into the rest and digest, phase. And then this movement work where you're really able to go super deep and heal stuff that keeps showing up for you has really unlocked. It's so interesting because it's this body work that has unlocked self-confidence in a capacity that I've truly never felt before. And it's not mind work, right? Because I've been in therapy for 10 years. It's the reconciling with my body and with my nervous system that's really allowed for that. And it feels so empowering. through the embodiment work, I also realized this very deep sister wound that I had that I didn't realize was kind of like driving the car of my life, kind of completely unbeknownst to me. And once I got into this, I believe Beth Clayton has been on your show in the past. She's a mentor of both of ours. We've worked with her on and off for many years, but she did this women's group called Embodied Rise. I did it for 6 months. And that's where I really dove into this sister wound kind of identification and reckoning. And, I remember maybe 6 months prior to when I had started, you had voice memoed me about your experience kind of opening up and awakening to your sister wound and, maybe how we've played a role with each other in that. And, I remember being like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I love you. And I'm happy that we're talking about it. But it was surface, right? Because I hadn't really deeply understood it. And it's been really powerful to kind of identify this societal, this deeply ingrained trigger that is part society, part childhood, part, all these things, and be able to just kind of work with it in order to allow yourself to soften in ways that you didn't know you really needed.
Yeah. I think, gosh, how this would have been so life-changing for me in high school, in college, in my early 20s. Like,
literally
I think
at any point.
Right. I mean, and then of course, when it finally came into my life, obviously it was massive and it continues to be. It's not like it's done. It's not like I've just like healed it and I don't operate from that place anymore at all. I'm just aware of it. I wasn't even aware it was I wasn't aware of something called a sister wound.
Yeah.
And how, gosh, so in my practice, in the 18 months that I spent doing the rewilding training, I remember one time, so we'd get put in breakout rooms a lot, and then we'd be given a practice to do, and to sit with another, female-bodied person, female identifying person right in front of me, and to be instructed and taught how to hold each other in so much love. And then also to be like how to energetically like give that love, and how to, for me, the gift was in the receiving. I'm like, I know how to give love. I don't know how to receive it. And especially to receive it from a woman, that's not my mother. I guess, or maybe a voice teacher. That's probably the only like real love from a woman I allowed in at the depths that I've begun to allow that love in. And some of those times, just like the weeping, the crying that would be held, and the woman sitting on the other side of the screen for me, just like beaming and just being like, I fucking love you. And like allowing that in. And so one time I said, I kind of like the instruction was, they're going to hold the container. The person that's like beaming you with love is going to hold the container. And so you can just let whatever arise. And what came up in that moment, I'm like receiving it and I'm feeling good and I'm standing in my fullness and receiving this woman's love. And then I reached a point where I was like, and now I feel like you're just going to, like, the minute this is done, you're going to go talk about me behind my back to everybody and go like, oh, she was really full of herself. And like, ooh, who does she think she is? And like, and so this woman, her name was Gwen, and she was sitting on the other side and she's like, yes, give it to me. Like, what else? I love you for sharing that. And what else? And what else? And it was so healing. And that just was like the tip of the iceberg, and continuing to go from there. Like that's just an example of this work.
Yeah, I'd love to share. I had such a similar experience. I've known from high school that people pleasing is a big issue of mine. Like, I am obsessed with what people think of me. Because I feel like I'm constantly told I take up too much space, and I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable. And I just remember, in the first month of our group, being on these Zoom calls with 12 women, not even participating, and being like, oh my gosh, they hate me so much. These women find me so annoying. They hate me so much. They hate that I'm the one who talks first sometimes. They hate that I'm complaining. They hate me. I was convinced that they hated me. And there was no reason for them to hate me. They didn't know me. Like it was the beginning of our journey. They were all strangers. And but what a lesson to learn that when I'm meeting new people, I assume that they hate me because I have dealt with so much hatred. And I remember having this breakdown, being like, I'm in such a rupture right now. I think you all hate me. I'm so uncomfortable being on this call. I feel like I need to apologize to all of you. I don't know what to do. And Beth, the leader of the group, was like, all right, let's take some frames. And then all the women, not all of them, but multiple of them jumped on saying, Maria, you're one of the most inspiring people in this group to me. Like, Maria, I love you. I fucking love you. I've loved you from the moment you came on this. And it was it took a minute, right? But also I think once that I was able to identify this rupture that I was going through, the way that all these women took such care of me over the 6 months of making sure that, when I had a big share, that they would kind of be like, hey, thanks for sharing that. That was really helpful for me, so that I was able to learn that my initial instinct is not my truth. It's my fear. And I have an option to choose something different. And I think it stems from like a long line of betrayals from my childhood with women. I think society, we're not taught to trust women. We're taught that there's not enough space at the table, that you've got to fight, especially in performing. I mean,
right.
How many times in performing, once you kind of get, your niche, you're up against the same 3 people every single time. You can't, having authentic, genuine friendships with other performers was always so hard for me because there is an unwritten, competition. And I know that like you and I had ruptures around that because I would have jealousy around you, because I was kind of trotting behind you in our careers. And, and it was all my shit. It was all my triggers. But then you get, when you're not able to identify that it's a trigger and see where it's coming from, it's much harder to kind of stomach and reconcile it.
Yeah. Oh gosh, this is so good. And just to give examples and be examples of like how we can like have these conversations in a conscious, loving way, I think is so huge. And so I am really grateful for your vulnerability and your sharing, right? Because this isn't something that either of us would have talked about 5 years ago in a public space where people could hear. And okay, so here's an interesting thing. So yes, a lot of it is our perceived fear, and mine is very similar. I would have so many of the similar things, same things as you, with like thinking that people are like, oh, Annalisa's talking again, or like, oh, Annalisa's like sharing again. And yet, like, while yes, also a lot of that stuff probably wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Sometimes it probably was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like sometimes there probably were people that I triggered with my brightness and my light and my maybe talking about myself or whatever it was, right? And something that's been that was a huge part of this initiation process for me is sitting with that and understanding that there will be people along the way who project onto me. Well, first of all, everybody's projecting onto everybody, but there will be people that project onto me and they are triggered by me, and they will recognize that they're being triggered by me and that's their thing, and that they're like they'll work on that, or that's something for them. Like even right now, like you and I could still trigger each other, and I trust at this point that you would go, oh, I have some work to do around this. Why is Annalisa triggering me, right? And same with me. But then there will be a lot of people that will be triggered by me that will not have that awareness, that will blame me, that will be like, oh, who does Annalisa think that she is? And like to be able to sit with that and love the part of me that aches because I want to be liked, and love the part of me that then feels scared to put my stuff out there because that's going to happen. and to not take it on, and then to not make it mean something about me, and to like all that's there. There's just so much there. But I think there's something that it just seems like such a key that can unlock people that are feeling stuck and afraid and stuck in the people pleasing, and to just like do the thing.
One of the biggest gifts a friend of mine, a sister of mine, recently gave me was I was experiencing a big, bright moment in my life, a big manifestation of something. And it was something that she was also working towards that she had not manifested yet. And we were going to be on this group call. It was going to come up. I was torn up about it because I was like, I don't want to trigger her. I don't want to upset her, but I need to like share this thing. And so I voice memoed her early, to be like, hey, I wanted to just touch base with you because you're going to hear this come up on a call. And I just wanted to like, know that you don't get blindsided and whatever. And she was like, Maria, my being triggered is not your responsibility. And I had spent, 24 to 48 hours just agonizing, because this was very close friend of mine, agonizing over how I was going to handle her feelings and make sure that she's comfortable. And she just was like, yeah, no, that's not yours to hold. Like, thank you for telling me, but it's not yours to hold. And I think, the identification of the wound, and then also understanding, just like you said, like loving yourself in the wound in those moments as well. And then being thankful for these little beacons that get dropped into your life to kind of affirm what you need to learn, is so important. And the bravery, especially when you're doing this in a public space, the bravery to authentically, unapologetically shine your light and love on the haters, right? I have tons of hate. I get not tons, but I've had haters before in my DMs and my reviews and my podcasts. And when I read their notes, I'm just like, oh man, I love you. You're clearly hurting. Like I've totally reframed when, in those first couple of years, when I would get a bad review on my podcast, I'd spiral for like 3 days about it. And now when I see it, I'm able to just send them so much love the side of me that still gets a little triggered by it, but also kind of be able to move forward with more language and information for actually what's going on in both parties, not knowing this other person, obviously, behind the review.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good. So I saw our mutual friend Heather last night. And I told her that we were going to have a conversation. I was like, I don't know where it's going to go, but I told her a tiny bit, and she was like, oh my gosh, I do not know that many people that can be like so transparent and real and talk about that kind of stuff in relationships. And she's like, and especially on a podcast. Because something that we said to each other back and forth in a voice memo a couple of weeks ago when we were, talking about doing this is, you made the point that I thought was so stunning, which is like, isn't it interesting that we are still in each other's lives and still so connected in the way that we are? Because how many people do you do a show with? And we didn't even do a show together. We did like a concert gig. Yeah. And why, why are we still so connected in the way that we are? And having, it's not like, I say this with like so much love and reverence for whatever this relationship is. It has not been all like sunshine and rainbows. It's been like, I love you. And also there have been aspects that like have driven me bonkers. Why won't you text me back? I know. Like these kinds of things, right? And
the lifelong. Yeah, totally.
Our communication styles and to be able to like talk like this and not have to wonder what the other person's thinking, and to be able to just because if neither of us cared, like I wouldn't bring it up to you, or like you wouldn't respond or whatever, right? You just kind of like let these things fall away. Yeah. So anyway, I'd love to hear words that you have around that.
Yeah, no, I marvel at this relationship, because I do feel like, we had this very beautiful, when we met in 11 years ago, we were in such different places. You were about to get engaged. I was like so single and like, I think I was still non-union. We were in such different places. We've always been not exactly at the same place in life. And we always come back to each other, and we always there is not, I wouldn't call it a falling out, but there's a period where we aren't in each other's lives. And then for some reason, we always come back into them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually my fault because I'm terrible at communication, but I will own that. And it is very interesting because we have had ruptures in our friendship multiple times when we were performers. You know, there were big kind of ugly conversations that we had to have in multiple occasions about how we communicate really differently and we approach friendships really differently. And so there was not a constant, but there was a, you know, occasional misfiring and feelings getting hurt. And it's funny because it's so fun. It is fun for us to be able to have these conversations now, because I think back then when we didn't have this language, when we didn't have this level of understanding, you know, a lot of those conversations, I felt like I was just constantly failing you. And I feel like a lot of those conversations, you were so disappointed by me. And like, we couldn't meet each other where we needed to be. You know, and in those moments, I also, because I think we both have this dimming our brightness, making people feel comfortable thing. I think we both loved each other and really wanted the relationship to work out. And yet also there was this rupture. And I think I've especially with this last time that you and I have reconnected, because you literally moved to Colorado. I moved to the woods. Like, there's no reason we need to be back in contact. Like, there's no reason,
right?
You know, if we wanted to never talk again, we could. We're not running into each other on an audition. We're not going to run into each other in New York City the way sometimes it might have been if we were still in New York. I do believe in past lives, and I do believe in souls that are tethered together to teach each other lessons and learn. And, you know, I learned this cool word in this mastermind that I was in, but like a trigger expander. So someone in your life who is meant to trigger you, but in order to expand you. So normally sometimes when you feel jealousy, oh, wait, what does this mean about me? And where do I have the work to be done? Mm-hmm. And I feel like for different reasons, we've both been trigger expanders for each other in our lives. And I think it's so beautiful that, you know, we get to kind of come together to chat about it now that we've had some distance. And I think we can kind of put different lenses on to look at what those ruptures looked like for us when we were still, you know, performing. And and I just feel really lucky. I do feel really lucky, and I do feel very connected to you. Like, even when we don't talk, I still feel like we've got a little string like attached to our hearts. And, you know, I know you think about me sometimes, and I know, and you know, I think about you. Like, it's, even if we're not talking, it's a very interesting spiritual connection,
right? We need to go sit with some like intuitive person who can be like, oh, well, it's, you know,
who were we in past lives? Yeah, totally.
Right. Yeah. Well, in listening to you speak, a couple things I feel is that like, I just have so much love for our little selves.
Yeah.
And because we were doing the best that we could.
Yes.
And we did a pretty damn good job.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I think, and now I feel like what we have now, and I can speak for myself, but I would imagine you feel similarly. What I have now that enables me to do this is the awareness of the trigger, as opposed to putting any blame on you, and going like, "Woo, this brings something up in me," and wanting to take responsibility, like going, "Oh, there's gold in this. There's true gold in this for me." And so then that's a gift by like this word trigger expander. Like if you're a trigger expander, like then that's a gift, and I get to uncover some light within myself that I dimming. And I also have this ability to love another woman in a way that I did not have the last time we were like really in each other's lives. And so how cool, to get to continue on this road together.
Do you want to go? Can I give an example that I've been thinking about all day?
Yes.
Okay. Cause I want to take the ownership of it now that I didn't have the capacity to back then.
Okay. Let's do some clearing.
Let's do some clearing, baby. So, oh my gosh. Okay. So Secret Garden was coming back to Broadway, and this was a period in our life we were talking all the time. We were on those Voxers like every day with Heather, actually.
Yep.
And Secret Garden was coming back. And for me, in my ego-driven like experience of this, because I had this plant-based podcast and because I was getting really into plants and because I didn't quite understand manifestation yet, I was like, this is it. Secret Garden is what I've been waiting for. Secret Garden is going to solve all my problems. Secret Garden is going to be the thing that fixes me, that like fixes the whole, right? And it's all the things coming together. It's a soprano role. It's plants. I'm going to deck out all of our, I'm going to have a plant partnership, and I'm going to put plants in all of the dressing rooms on Broadway. And, Good Morning America is going to feature me because I put plants in the dressing rooms. Like I spun out, right? And so it just meant so much. There was so much attachment to that show and what it meant for me. And I remember we were going back and forth in some sort of Vox notes where I was like, I feel like the Secret Garden's here. I'm so excited. And then I remember you said, yeah, the Secret Garden's here. I'm so excited too. Like I'm excited to throw my hat in the ring for that too. And I got so upset. And I remember in the moment, I think I said like, why can't I just have this one thing? Or I don't remember, but like I projected all my shit onto you and I got really upset, and it had nothing to do with you, but I made it all about you. And I confronted you, I think in a kind of a weird way. Cause I think you were like, hey, you're acting weird. Like what's going on? And it was a very like disembodied, egocentric, lack of like, it wasn't informed, like, but I was doing my best, but it was not informed. I did not have the skills and the capacity to be able to recognize, Annalise is going in for this. She's also perfect for the role for a million of other reasons. And also there's 40 other people that are perfect for the role. And I can love her in her audition and love myself. Like the whole world is available to us. And also, what if the Secret Garden isn't even the thing? Like, who cares?
Right. But I think it didn't even end up happening, but
for either of us. Yeah. Well, right. Neither of us booked it. And then it never went to Broadway.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, right. And because I didn't book that, I booked something else and all these other things in my life that lined up because the Secret Garden happened. Right. But in that moment, so I want to formally apologize to you for how I behaved in that moment. And also, and I appreciate the grace that you gave me in that moment, because I do think that was, that was a moment that was not a good look on me. And I think you were able to kind of do the best that you could and meet me in that moment of understanding and also advocating for yourself to also audition. And I wanted to share that story because I feel like women in the industry, like, I think this is not a unique experience. I think there's jealousy and frustration around this. And if there's some magical story or potion that can help people maybe like put a pin in the balloon and like let a little bit of air out. I wish I had heard this, before that. So anyway, I love you, and I'm sorry neither of us booked
so
it.
Much.
Yeah.
I love you so much. And I just like deep bow for just sharing that. And you're so courageous and vulnerable for letting that be seen, truly.
Yeah.
And I remember that, of course, but I don't remember even my response to it. I don't remember. And honestly, like, that wasn't something for me that I like carried. I never, in my mind, I never like held it against you or anything.
Which is so interesting.
Isn't it such an example? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's also such a great example of how, because you share this too, like when we do play big, it does trigger others. Right. And so then of course, because of that similarity that we've already spoken about, like wanting to then will like modify and play smaller and not tell people things. That's just like a perfect example, because we don't have the capacity we've not been trained and taught to have to hold other people's full, especially other women, like their greatness and their fullness, how to hold it. Okay. How to hold for me to like, okay, so now here you are. I've been podcasting longer than you. You've got over 3 million downloads, the success that you have had, right? So for me to be able to like hold and celebrate and be like, this is incredible, feel the tinge within me that's like, well, why don't I get that? Or like, is there, what's wrong with me? Or like, what do I, right? Like I have a tinge of that to honor that within myself and to still have the love. Like to me, that's like ninja level, next level.
Yes.
I certainly did not have that capacity even 3 years ago. So it's really beautiful to get to practice with you. And I think that's exactly what we get to do together. And I would be remiss not to mention the Enneagram in this because I think, right? So I have had an Enneagram expert on the podcast and I can relink to that episode, but I know are you a 3 with a 2 wing or 4 wing?
4 wing.
Okay. So you're a 3, I'm a 2, but I'm a 2 with a 3 wing. And in our relationship, the places that I've gotten triggered most have to do with our relationship. And like, because friendship and connection is like everything to me. And so, right, when I feel, and we could go into stories and reasons why and all of that, but, and also like having a parent who kept saying like, I will be there for you and then didn't show up. So like, that's such a trigger for me. So when there's a friend that's like, we're like best of friends. And then they like, in my mind,
ghost you,
right? Like doesn't respond. I mean, my immediate reaction, my trigger is like, they don't care about me. They don't love me. I thought this was right. And so, that's been the place. And I would even like I wouldn't intentionally test you sometimes, but I would test you sometimes where I would like vox you and the voxers disappear now within 30 days and you wouldn't respond.
Oh yeah.
And like,
that was a big one. That one. Right. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
And then like, I would be like, well, 30 days went by and like, and whereas now I just think this is proof of growth is you and I a few weeks ago were like got back and forth on like some great like voice message chatting through text message. And, I like responded to one of yours and then you went bye-bye. And like cue the old things of like, oh, okay.
Here she goes. Yeah.
But what did I do, Maria?
You followed up. You texted me being like, hey, pinging you.
Hey, just a reminder, I messaged you. I'd love to hear back, which is there is this aspect in me that wants to be like, well, see, and like, please, if my husband were here, he'd be like, oh yeah, that's like a thing Analisa does, right? Like it's not personal to Maria.
Yeah.
But that is a beautiful trigger of mine and was a great moment for me to like suck up my pride and like, I know what is going on in your life right now and how busy and full your life is. And I know that it's not personal, but oh man, I would take it so personally.
Yeah.
And I think to not, I think the Enneagram helps us understand each other too, like what your driving force is versus mine and how we can like make space and understand each other and not take it all so personally.
That's so interesting. Your correlation between 3 career driven and then 2, I was just having a conversation with so thank you because you got me into the Enneagram years ago because you ask all your friends to take it. And then me and Heather were like major Enneagram girls for a while. And since then, my mom has gotten into the Enneagram and we had this big family conversation about all of my family's numbers. And it was so enriching. And I just think the Enneagram is one of the most powerful tools ever. Now I'm also very into human design. But
same.
Yeah. But what I just wanted to circle back and reflect, this is once again so interesting because yes, and you're right to feel that, right? Because I am notoriously the worst with remembering to respond to texts and follow through. But it's once again how you were like, well, I didn't really remember the secret garden thing. I genuinely consider you one of my closest friends in those moments where you were getting so triggered and thinking that you weren't important to me. You were genuinely one of the most important friendships that I have. I just approach friendships from a different experience. And so then it was this like, it was this misfiring. And there was one other thing I wanted to say. Well, I just think the stories that we tell ourselves that are associated with these triggers versus the reality of it. Oh, my entire business now, because my weakness is follow through, like in every aspect of my life. All the people that I've hired in my business, literally all they do is send me those texts. Hey, did you do this podcast yet? Hey, did you do this yet? Hey, you're 3 days late on this deadline. Hey, because that's just it's my toxic trait, right? That I kind of can't get rid of in every aspect. And so it is very interesting that to me, I was like, oh my God, thank God Analisa just texted me. I can't believe, this was a crazy weekend. Thank God. I really wanted to get back to this, but it was the thing where, you open the text and whatever, and you texted me and reminded me, and I went into Voxer, and then we kind of continued. I don't know. I just think it's also fascinating how we all live in our worlds and our stories. And the more we can identify and give grace, right, to the other person, and love and recognize that we are able to be different. Love languages. I think you and I have like polar opposite love languages as well. That's been a huge tool in my marriage.
Yeah.
Just understanding that, it's also, it's okay for all of us to be different, and just to learn how to love each other kind of exactly where we are, and not need this desire to change people, right? Like my thing would have been like, well, if Analisa books the Secret Garden thing, like I've got to figure out how to love her and celebrate her and be there on opening night, wholeheartedly cheering her on, and, setting my shit aside. That's the expansion opportunity there.
Right.
Right. And I just think it's so fascinating. And I think the other thing is, once I've learned, when women can learn to authentically celebrate each other and collaborate with each other, we're unstoppable.
Yeah.
We're unstoppable. You mentioned, my podcast might be a little bit bigger than yours, but I would genuinely do anything for you and your show, right? If we are able to like collaborate, and, I'm always here to give advice or be a sounding board. I feel like when women can really, and I only do that because I know that you meet me there. I know that you meet me with the love and with the support. And so I'm like, great, I'm going to meet you there too. And what can we do? And how can we troubleshoot? And blah, 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 and I just think that, in my baby feminist era, but like society and the patriarchy, and like, we have just been taught from such a young age to fear each other, and to not trust each other, and to crush each other, to like keep us down. And I think when we can kind of move through that and actually learn that collaborating with women is the greatest thing. Collaborating with enlightened women is the greatest thing, when you can have these conversations and move through stuff and build things together. Like it's the dream,
Yeah. I think I 100%, and this could be a whole different episode, but like I 100% think that there is a reason that we have been, taught and conditioned to fear each other and to judge each other and criticize each other and break each other down. Because together, I think that how powerful we can be.
Yes.
And then let's also like take away the gender from this all, because we all have these aspects within us, whether like whatever body that we're in. Mm-hmm. And we have different energies that are dominant within us. And so just if you've been listening and then it's already been hard to kind of find where you are in this, depending on how you identify, like, just the aspect of you that cannot handle the fullness of another, that gets triggered by the fullness of another, versus being able to hold that love and do that work. So I because that's ultimately what we want, is people that it's not, it's the opposite of like this individualist capitalist, like everybody go out on your own, versus building things together and supporting each other. And the last thing I want to say in this vein is like, I think what we have just done is something I'm actually quite comfortable doing, which is having these hard conversations, like moments where I don't know what you're going to say. Like I'm ready for it. Like bring it. But I just think of so many people, clients or people in my family that have like never had a conversation like that with their brother. or with a sister, like a blood relative or a friend, because of how hard that is. And so I hope this can also just serve as an example of like, of like, get in there, get in there and just hold it with so much love and practice and mess up. And then, you're in the middle of a conversation and you mess up and you go back another day when you've cooled down and you try again. And, I have this relationship with my spouse, obviously, but I also have it with all of my closest friends where we can talk like this. And even my mom, but even with her being able to be like, Mom, how come in high school this? And like have these kind of like conversations. So yeah, anything around that or anything else you kind of feel to weave in?
I think that is the magic sauce. Like the game that I've been playing with myself this year since recognizing my sister wound and realizing that I think the whole world is out to get me and like no one likes me, is this new game that I'm playing, which I will say I've had probably 95% success rate with, is when I see a story come up in my head, I do my best to call it out.
Yeah.
And not call it out in like an aggressive way, but when example, in my business, I have this business relationship with a very powerful person who I decided hated me and didn't want to support me anymore. And for my book launch, I got on a call with her and I was like, hey, I don't know where our relationship went off, but it's been my experience in the last year that something has changed and that, there hasn't been as much reciprocity and there hasn't been as much support. And you're just one of my most treasured business relationships. And I'd love to kind of dive into what happened. I'd love to take ownership of anything that I might have done unknowingly to upset you. And I'd love to kind of try and move forward together. And her response was, number one, who's coaching you? Like, how are you having this conversation with me? This is like a CEO of a really big company. And number two, thank you so much. Like, this is what women need to be doing more in the workplace as well as in personal. Once again, this is so interesting that I'm immediately going to the career 3 right now.
I got one for the other side in just a second. So keep going.
Okay, perfect. But yeah, so now it's just become kind of a spiritual practice of mine in business and in personal that, when I'm building a story in my head about any side of any perceived slight or any perceived dislike of someone, I do my best to just kind of clear it and call it out to them because, like I said, 95% of the time, it is genuinely fake news in my mind that is I am rotting from the inside out with. And so being able to just kind of clear these things out that I've been carrying has been like enlightening, like lighten. I feel so much lighter. And I feel like every single conversation I have that proves that these stories are wrong is another step towards not even building the stories anymore, because I'm starting to really be able to identify the trigger, the wound. This is the story and not the truth. And it's a practice. It's like you said, like this stuff doesn't necessarily get resolved. It's just a practice of identifying and putting the pin in the balloon, like I like to say. Okay, so what's yours?
Well, you
on the
are
other side?
Changing neural pathways as well, right? Like you are. And because those other ones, my teacher says they're like grooves as deep as the Grand Canyon. Like those are all right. And so you're changing your brain as well, which is incredible. So my 18-month-long training program, the very last weekend, a lot of us decided to gather in person in the mountains in Colorado. And in my last one-on-one with my teacher, I did have this experience in my second to last weekend where some shit came up and it came at me. But I 100% believe that it was like the perfect trigger and initiation for me to continue down this path of like how I so deeply am inhibited by my fear of what others think about me. It was like the perfect storm for me. And so in my last one-on-one, I sat with her and I was like, I'm feeling so much better, but I am thinking about this last weekend and how there's a part of me that is like, people are like, oh, I wish Annalisa wasn't coming. And she was like, and I was like, so what do I do, Sabrina? And she's like, you know what I would do? It's going to be the most powerful thing that you can do is I would walk in and the minute you get there, you just tell them all that. And you're like, I am so afraid that none of you all want me here and you take responsibility for that. I don't want you all to take care of me. I don't want you all, like, you're not responsible, but I just need to like put this out there. And what was so cool is I actually identified it was one specific person. So in kind of playing through that scenario, it was one specific person. And so I reached out to them and I shared that with them. We cleared what was there, and it was that powerful. And so it's exactly what you're saying. And she also said, I cannot wait for you to get to the other side of this. I believe that you, Analisa, like your number one practice right now is, I think she actually said, is not giving a fuck about what anybody else cares about you, like truly to your core. That it, and woof. And that has been happening though. Like I've been given lesson after lesson since she told me that like 3 months ago, like furthering in this initiation of coming home to myself and understanding the projections of others. And it's been so powerful. So that's my example of what to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's how you walk through life, that specific fear. If you walk through life with that, putting you in this cage, all of a sudden, like she said, like you get to just like stretch your wings for the first time. And then the next level of that is also like, oh my God, this has like proliferated like my entire life. My relationship with, family, business, friendship, like it can really, because it's relational and it's not in one specific thing, you can see it everywhere, which can also be overwhelming. I feel like for anyone listening, sometimes these realizations are really overwhelming at first, and you have to give yourself grace because especially in that I just remember that first week of realizing the sister wound and having my like emotional breakdown on Zoom with all these women. I had to numb out a little bit. There were days that I like couldn't hold it because I was just like, this is so much. And, giving yourself grace and understanding it's like, this is a lifelong practice and process, but also those first kind of couple of months of these identifications and it can be really raw, like really. Yummy and raw.
Yeah. Serena says sometimes you have to go offline to come back online. And like, it's like consciously checking out too, which is beautiful. So I love that you brought that in as a practice. And find the supports, find the teachers, Google, look up. I mean, you can like put in sister wound in your podcast search and there are a lot out there. So if this is, piquing your interest, that's available. I'm running another group program. And this will be an aspect of it, like talking about being triggered by each other and sharing. I used to be terrified to hold spaces for actors. Actually, one of the first groups that I held during the pandemic, something happened with 2 women. There was something really interesting. One of them left and the other one was like, oh, I see them at every audition. And like, that was in the space. And I was like, oh God, I do not have the training to hold this kind of space for people. And now I do. I am so ready.
You're so perfect for that now.
I'm like, let's go.
How lucky Analisa, I wish you had this group when I was performing. I wish I had this group, 5 years ago.
Me too. Yeah. I wish as I started the conversation, like, oh my goodness, I wish I had this in high school. I'm going to share one more vulnerable thing. Even in high school, like I did not have the capacity to like handle competition in any way, like somebody else getting the solo in choir or me getting it and then somebody getting mad, like that happened constantly. And, I guess small town in Tennessee, we all had the same voice teacher. And I guess some of the girls had like talked to my voice teacher about me. And my voice teacher like comes out to the car to talk to my mom and me. And she said something along the lines of like, I want you to know 2 things. Like Analisa has it. She is going to go really far, but she's got to be nicer to people or something along these lines. But of course, can I tell you really, I didn't even understand that. Like, I wish that somebody would have been like, let's go into this. What's your experience? Why is this so hard for you? Like, let's talk about other ways to do. There were no tools. All I heard was like, Analisa has it. And that like bolstered my ego even more of like, well, I'm good. So I love on her. I have gone back and written, messages to girls I went to high school with and like apologized. One of them graciously wrote me back and said, oh, Analisa, we were all terrible to each other. And I'm like, sure, it wasn't as bad in your mind or I'm sure it wasn't as bad as you think that it is. But that's something I still hold to this day. And, So, I just know so many people are going to be like nodding along so much to this because I know it's not unique to the 2 of us.
Yeah. And And it's like, yeah, it's just like when you show I feel like that was a big part of the witnessing, I think is very important. How you said, just being witnessed by another person and having them beam light on you, being witnessed in your depth, in the depths, in the ugly stuff, in your shadow, and still being loved. Yeah. That was major. I had a couple of moments in this group where, I remember I was making peace and loving on the part of me. I have always wanted to be a star, like always. Fame. I think I nicknamed her like my fame whore. Like I have always wanted to be famous. I've always wanted to be a star. I have always felt deep in my bones that I was meant to reach like millions of people. That's just something I felt since I was a little kid. And then because of my career in performing and because I was always cast as the understudy and because the performing just didn't go the way I went, I really lost touch with my ability to claim my stardom. And I remember confessing that almost like, because it was some exercise we were doing where that came up and it was just like so obvious to me, like, I have disconnected from the side of myself that really does want to own this success in this very specific capacity. And I just remember the women on the call being like, amazing, let's go for it. Like you deserve it. I see you on TV. I see you talking to Oprah. These are the downloads I've gotten because you've shared that. And you've actually, in you saying that, have allowed me to kind of come to terms with maybe aspects that I've wanted instead of, I feeling gross about it and just feeling quiet and gross about it because I think it's so gross, but actually maybe it could be empowering to someone. That witnessing in your shadow or in your something that you feel, weird.
Something that you've deemed as unlovable, right?
Yes. Yes. Is so magical. Oh my God. It's so magical.
Yeah, it's so healing. I love you so much. We could talk for another 2 hours on this podcast and maybe we'll just make it a regular 6-month checkup and do an episode.
I'm here for it. And I'm so proud of you, my friend. Also this rebrand, I want to frame, I just want to reflect the bravery that you've had to take the plunge and to move to Colorado and do this rebrand. And I've known you for 11 years. I remember too, your desire to teach, your desire to hold space for others, even back then, even when it was your yoga calling, even when it looked different in other capacities. And it's just so fun to watch this all kind of congeal and become this greater thing that like you said, your 24-year-old self might have had an inkling on. It's been so fun and it's such an honor to be back on the rebranded podcast.
Thank you. Where can people find you, Maria?
Yeah, if you like plants, you're gonna like me. You can come over to the Growing Joy with Plants podcast. Over on that podcast, we have tutorials for how to care for houseplants, how to garden if you want to grow your own food indoors and outdoors, and also how to use nature and plants to live a happier life. So there's some therapeutic stuff, and then there's some real tactical how-tos. And then you can find me at Growing Joy with Maria on all socials, and that's also my website.
Yes. It's so funny. I've asked a plant question on my own Instagram stories and somebody's like, you should check out Maria. And I was like, I know Maria, but
you're like, you should. I got Maria on speed dial. Thank you.
I message her about my fiddle leaf fig. It's fine. No, but truly her stuff is so great. And I think even as a performer, I recommend anybody wherever you are in your life. But if you're somebody who's feeling your own soulful ambition, calling you and pulling you in different directions, let Maria be an expander for you and what's possible. Thank you so much, Maria. This has been so beautiful.
So fun. Such a good catch up.
Oh, yes. We'll see you back here next week on Soulful Ambition.
I love this conversation. I love where we went. If you enjoyed it and it served today, give me a subscribe, rate the podcast, share it with a friend, tag me on social media. Again, all of this is tips for a podcaster and it's deeply appreciated and it helps spread it to wherever it's meant to go, whoever is meant to receive it. And lastly, if you would like to join us for the next 6 months of the Soulful Ambition Circle, I would love to have you. Click the link below and I will see you there. Okay, so much love. We'll see you soon.